508, 508, a wonderful Savior. Let's sing. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, where rivers of pleasure I see. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows of dry thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He takes my burden away. He holdeth me up, and I shall not be moved. He giveth me strength as my day. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows of dry thirsty land. He hideth my soul in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. With numberless blessings each moment we crown, and filled with his fullness divine. I sing in my rapture, oh glory to God, for such a Redeemer as mine. He hideth my soul in the cloud, that shadows of dry thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. When clothed in his righteous stripes, and I rise to meet him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, his wonderful love, I'll shout with the millions on high. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows of dry thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of his love, and covers me there with his hand, and covers me there with his hand. Page 528, 528. I know that my Redeemer lives and never prays for me. I know eternal life he gives, from sin and sorrow free. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life he gives. I know that my Redeemer lives. He wills that I should wholly be and work his law in me. Then I his holy face may see, when from this earth life free. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life he gives. I know know that my Redeemer lives. I know that the sinful in the saving grace is not. I know that He will come again to take me home on high. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life He gives. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know that over yonder stands a place prepared for me. Oh, a house made with hands, most wonderful to see. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life He gives. I know that my Redeemer lives. Please mark your songbook page 589. 589 will be the song after this. Go ahead.
Son always keeps with you. Good evening. Matthew 24. And last week we did what was leading up to Matthew 24. And we still, it still comes back to the point of the purpose and understanding it. Verse 1-3 tells us that when Jesus went out and departed from the temple, his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he said at the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, what will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" There's the three questions that the disciples had, and I think sometimes we may miss this point, and I didn't bring it up last week. This was not an open sermon. It's not a public sermon. This was to just the disciples. It was up to them to share it after the resurrection to the church, but it was not given to everyone. There's something about the temple when you get into Matthew 23 that is important to realize. Ezekiel saw a vision of God departing from the temple. And it's a realization that you go back about 10 chapters or so, and Jesus cleanses the temple. Said, "You've made my Father's house a den of thieves." Runs their mouth. But now notice what he says. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. how often I wanted to gather your children together as hens gather chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. Whose house? Your house. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, it's an interesting thing that he puts that way. Your house. It's no longer my house or my Father's house. Now it's your house. The idea of I will never leave you nor forsake you has had many come to believe that they can do whatever they want and God will always be there, including the Jewish nation. If you go back and look at just the history of the Old Testament, the idea was no matter what we do, we're still God's chosen people. And now God says, not anymore. Not anymore. So here's where you come into Matthew 24. Start out with some general signs and troubled times. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. What keeps someone from being deceived? Knowledge. Knowledge of the truth. You have it available to you. You'll only be deceived if you let somebody without researching yourself. So first of all, before he tells them, he says, here's to know if someone deceives you. Easy way to say it. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. That's a twofold statement there. The primary statement Jesus got across is that they will come acknowledging that he, Jesus, is the Christ. And use it to deceive. The other will be that they will actually claim to be the Christ. Which is the easiest one to tell? One that claims to be the Christ, that'd be easy for them. But the one that claimed that he is the Christ and uses that to deceive people makes it a little harder. Paul was addressing something like that in 2 Corinthians. Many false apostles. They claimed Jesus was the Christ, but they taught things different than what was to be taught. Notice, you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled. Why is that such a problem today? Okay, but why is it that the ones that want to turn Matthew 24 into the end of the world every time a war pops? See, here it is coming true. And Jesus said, don't be troubled, for all these things would come to pass, but the end is not yet. The truth of the matter is there are always, as Ron pointed out, wars and rumors of wars. And he said, don't worry about the rumors of wars. This is just something that's going to go on. But this is an interesting point. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. You ever notice political leaders try to take advantage as soon as there's problems? It's still their power. It still happens today. How many know about Pompeii? What do you know about Pompeii? Volcano covered it up.
You go there today and see the bodies laying in the street.
Yeah, been there. They put that plaster Paris in there when they kept excavating, finding these holes, and somebody came up with the idea if we'd get close to those holes before we actually break into them, because the dust would just fall and be a big hole. Let's see what was there, what was supposed to be, and they take that plaster Paris, dust it off. They found bodies, or molds of bodies where they died. But that's not the biggie. That happened in AD 79. Notice this one. I found this out last week. The ancient Roman city of Pompeii was a wealthy tourist city that sat on the coast near the Bay of Naples. In 62 AD, an earthquake of 7.5 magnitude demolished the city of 20,000 people, killing more than 2,000. The damage extended to the city of Herculaneum, and the destruction was as extensive as the tsunamis in Japan and Indonesia in the 2000s. Due to the inability to communicate immediately, Rome was unaware of the earthquake, and on that same day, February 5th, the port of Ostia in Rome was hit by a tidal wave caused by the Pompeii quake, destroying 3 ships containing a year's supply of grain for Rome. The city of Pompeii experienced extensive damage, and by 79 AD, repairs were still underway. They hadn't even finished repairing the city before the volcano destroyed it. But the point of this is, just as Jesus said, there'll be famines and pestilence in various places. See, he didn't center that, sometimes we get that, he didn't center that on Jerusalem itself. But here's the reality. Rome was the center of the empire. If it affected the Roman economy, whose else economy would it affect? The entire world, the empire, including Jerusalem. The famines and earthquakes. Notice that the earthquake caused them to lose a year's worth of grain for Rome. Famine. And then persecutions of Christians. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So there's this idea that Jesus established that of all the nations, meaning the known world, that the gospel would reach that before the fall of Jerusalem. But that's what he's talking about, is the end of Jerusalem. There's an interesting point. How easy it is to understand why the Jews hated Christians. I mean, we don't agree with it, but we understand it because it took away their life, their livelihood. They saw it, many of them saw it as heresy. They saw Christianity that way. What about those other nations? Same reason. Just as much as Christianity was if you embrace Christianity, was taking away the culture and heritage of Judaism, it was taking away the culture and heritage of the Greeks. If you go to the arena in Ephesus, caused such an uproar, it wasn't Jews there that wanted of him. It was the Greeks. Anybody need any eggs? Cackling over there. The Greeks hated them. In fact, the main reason Ephesus that started the uproar, Alexander the silversmith, because they made all these idols, Diana, and they realized that if people turned to Christianity, it would take away their livelihood. Why didn't Nicodemus confess Jesus in the open before his death?
There were other people out of the synagogue.
Yeah. Yeah, they put people out of the synagogue. He would lose, they would remove him from being a Pharisee. Yeah, he loses privileges, all those things. It's interesting to portray, notice this, deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. Many will be offended, will betray one another. Here's an interesting thought. What about the blind man in John chapter 9 who refused to stand with him? His own parents. He's of age, ask him. Because if we say he's a prophet, you're going to kick us out of the synagogue. Same thing. Matthew 10, verses 34 through 37. Do not think I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. If you're not willing to stand up for me out of fear of what mom and daddy do or who you may lose in your family, you're not worthy. But he's telling them straight up. Your own parents, your own siblings, your in-laws will turn you over. By the time Jerusalem fell, the persecution was worldwide. Now, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So 3 times Daniel uses the term abomination and desolation in that matter. Verse 27 of chapter 9, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wings of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. This is the 70 weeks prophecy, talking of the Messiah. This is the one he's actually talking about. He mentions it 2 other times. In Daniel 11:31, forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. And from the time that daily sacrifice is taken away and abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. That is a temporary, as we studied when we looked at Daniel, that had to do with Epstein's. That is the problem, temporary. But notice in Daniel 9, and on the wings of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. But go back up there. He shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Who did that? According according to Daniel 9:20. 70 weeks prophecy. The Messiah. What happened at time he was crucified? What happened to the temple? The veil was rent in two. And here's you have to understand, though the sacrifice and offerings would continue until AD 70 when Titus destroyed the temple, they were no longer maintained or expected by God. They weren't authorized. They came to an end. So you have a point of, in that middle of that week, he would bring that to an end. And then later, on the wings of abomination shall be one who makes desolate. They will bring it to a complete end. When's the last time Judaism had a sacrifice in the temple? Wasn't after AD 70. They haven't had one. They haven't had a sacrifice, period. Because there's nowhere authorized to have one except the temple, according to the old law. They haven't kept the Passover, not according to the law. They haven't kept any of the feast days, including Pentecost, according to the law, since that last Pentecost. But notice what Luke tells us. When we look on the wings of those who bear the denomination, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the countries enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. What was the signet of the Roman Empire? What was on top of their staffs and flags that they carried? Eagles, just like we have today. They have eagles, eagle wings. So when you see the wings, when you see the armies, well, they're tied together. Notice, let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as it has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. Now notice what he's saying there. The tribulation that is going to fall on Jerusalem is going to be the worst tribulation that has ever fell on any nation. And there will not be one like it again. And notice, unless those days are shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Y'all notice I had an asterisk. Why is it a problem for pregnant women and nursing babies? Why does he say, but woe to them? Even for the Christians. It's going to be hard for them to travel. What if you're stuck in Jerusalem in that famine? That your flight may not be in winter, another difficulty, or on the Sabbath. What did the Jews do on the Sabbath? Limited. Very little. Very little, to the point that they would close the gates of the city so nobody could leave, nobody could come in. They closed them on Friday afternoon before the Sabbath began. Wouldn't open them up until Saturday evening as we date time. So nobody could go out where in fact, they considered the opening and closing gates, because they closed them at night anyway, labor. So strict they were, so you wouldn't be able to leave. Think about this point, if you were in the city. I've got myself too far. Lost my place. Stuck there in that city in that famine, how hard would that be on a mother? There is a description in Josephus' books and the Jewish Wars. I want to say it's book 6, section 35 to 34, 35. That describes a woman who had came to Jerusalem from one of the other cities and was there during the siege. And she had an infant somewhere around a year old. And daily, a guard, and the reason I say that, call it a guard, is because Josephus doesn't make it clear whether it's Roman guard or part of the Jewish guard, the rebellers. But they would come in daily searching her house and taking whatever they could to feed themselves and to take whatever possessions she had to sell. Some attribute it to a Roman guard. There's a few that say, no, it wasn't Roman guard. I read it myself, I can't tell. I don't know why they conclude that. He calls her Mary by name. But after many days, and he implies months of this, she is nursing her son. And this is why I tend to think that it was talking to Jewish guard. She says to the child, oh, what belates us? If the Romans come, slavery. If they do not come, starvation. Basically, looking at the child, according to Josephus, says, you will be my meal. Kills the child, cuts it in half, cooks it and eats it. Has the other part cooked as well. The guard, whoever they were, they smell it cooking and come and demand what she has prepared for food and threaten to kill her if she doesn't give it to them. And she tells them that she has ate half but saved half for them, and goes and gets it and presents it to them. They go out in the street, throw it up. That's how bad it got in Jerusalem. The indication is that she just one such woman. By the time Rome got done with the Jews and went up to Masada, Herod's summer palace, many Jews were there in rebellion, and they knew they were trapped. They knew they were eventually going to die, that they cast lots between households. And the agreement would be this household would kill this household, who would kill their family, so that the Romans wouldn't do it. And then they themselves cast lots as to who would kill who, until there was one man left, because they saw suicide as many as an unpardonable sin. And so the one that drew the last lot was the one that had to kill himself or let the Romans do it. after everyone else was dead. But notice that for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. If the tribulation is in Jerusalem, and as Josephus records, over 1 million people were killed, Jews, over I think I want to say around 300,000 were captured, Jews, no Christians. Why does it matter? But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. It comes back to that persecution of the Jews and Judaism being declared illegal, affecting Christianity as it's being seen as a sect. Plus, all the Jewish Christians were considered outlaws. Jewish people were considered outlaws, period, after that. They had no rights, even as Paul, who was born free of Roman, he lost his Roman citizenship. If he'd have been alive, he would have lost his Roman citizenship. So it would eventually affect them in one way or another, just not on the scale. More warnings of deception. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Does it bother you sometime that the faithful can be deceived? How much are we willing to hold to the truth? That's what he's talking about. He says, if possible, even elect. What he's saying is the faithful of the faithful are not going to be deceived. But there will be people of the faith that will be deceived. Because in his terminology of the elect, he's saying those that are firmly in the Lamb's Book of Life. I was thinking about this. I did this morning, worked on this more this morning, and I also worked on my sermon for Sunday night. How do you define prophecy?
Define prophecy? Well, there's two categories. Prophecy, and then there's false prophecy.
Okay. How do you define true prophecy? Compared to words in
Deuteronomy 18 or 19, where Moses, the people asked, how do we know if it's a true prophet? He told them that if what the prophet says comes true.
Okay. Let me rephrase this, because y'all are answering, how do you tell if it's really prophecy? Well, if it's true, it's going to come true, those things. I want a definition of the word prophecy. How do you define prophecy? The word. Let's hit me that. What we look at is the foretelling of future events. That's what we look at prophecy as, right?
The ability to speak to something that's in the future.
Okay? God is able to speak of things that are in the future. How would you feel about this definition? Prophecy is God sharing his foreknowledge with mankind.
Or any word. If a prophet is a mouthpiece of God, then prophecy are the words of God.
Well, God's word. And there's that point of God sharing his word, and I agree with that. Prophets speak for God, and that point prophecy. But then when we get into that future events and those things, that's literally God sharing his foreknowledge. You go back to Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, God has shared with you the things of the future. You go back all the way back to Pharaoh and his dream. Joseph says, God has showed you what will come to pass. So it just hit me today that when you think about it, in these things that we look at, and we're beneficial because we can look back and see them fulfilled, it was God sharing his foreknowledge. Even when we look at the judgment day. And notice, see, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. Here's an interesting point. Who's he speaking to? The apostles. What are they going to have that others don't? Miraculous powers, the full endowment of the Holy Spirit. And yet he tells them, don't believe it. Don't ask the Holy Spirit if it's true. Don't look to see it. Don't believe it. Because when it happens, you'll know it.
This is right about the place where it switches.
Almost. Here he's talking about that judgment. And what he's saying is, when I come in judgment, you're going to see it. You're going to know it just the same as you see lightning. You're going to know this is going to happen, is what's happening. And we have to accept that they did and that they shared it with the church, because not one Christian died at the hands of the Romans. Not one Christian was captured in Jerusalem. That speaks volumes. And then he makes, before we get there, I'm going to do Isaiah. Well, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, all hands will be lit. Every man's heart will melt. And they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their face will be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellation will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, a man more than golden wedge of Ophir. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. Now there he's foretelling the fall of Jerusalem in Nebuchadnezzar's time. When it talks about the sun and the moon and the stars, two things that tell them God's not going to help you and your leaders aren't going to know what to do.
Yeah, and prophecies like this sometimes can be had dual.
They can.
And what the prophet saw was right there, like you see the foothills of the mountains, but all you see in the back is just the little tips of the mountains. And you know that it's there, but you don't see all of it.
Yeah. And so you see these little pieces, and then you see a greater fulfillment of it later on. And you have to understand, Nebuchadnezzar put a siege on Jerusalem 3 times. Each time he had to return was worse than the first.
It took Titus a long time to destroy Jerusalem.
Titus, if I remember correctly, about 3 years. And they did it in sections. There were areas that they took an area, and that's why it's kind of questionable as this woman, was she in an area where the Roman guard was, that it wasn't fully taken over yet, or was she still some of the rebellers, is the way some put it. Yeah, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, I come to the conclusion that it was some of the rebellers, some of those who were rebelling against Titus. In fact, when the word comes to Titus, what this woman has done, according to G.S., Titus and the things that are happening in Titus basically says, we offered them peace. What does that mean? What's happened to them is their own doing. We offered them peace. They chose this. So he had no remorse, no regret. And the more they fought against, the angrier he got. Much like Nebuchadnezzar. So Judaism. That's really what, in bringing this judgment on Jerusalem, he was bringing it on Judaism itself. But notice, for wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not light, the stars will fall from heaven and the power of the heavens will be shaken. Here's the point here. When they go through this tribulation and everything comes down, what was the final point of the fall of Jerusalem? The pinnacle part. Destruction of the temple. What was the temple to be? In the Judaism mind. God's house. Center of Judaism. God's house. If that falls, what do you have? The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken. Everything that you counted on will be gone. There's no light for Israel anymore, unless they come children of God, Christians. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Don't ask me what that means. It's something that they would recognize, but something that has not been shared with us.
I was visualizing the Batman logo up there in the sky.
Yeah. Something along those lines. Somebody told me one time that during that time frame that there was a swirling of visions of angels that people saw swirling. I have never been able to find a record of that. So, and I have searched where I could of Josephus, because that's what they claim that he recorded it. I actually have my father's book, The Works of Josephus. Never found any of that. I found that part about Mary. I remember my father telling it, and Jackie Steersman's notes, he tells about it. But they both attribute it to the Roman guard. When I read it for myself, I didn't see anything that could firmly say this had to be the Roman guard.
Yeah, Josephus gives us some information, but I always got to remember that he wasn't inspired.
No.
He also was more into saving his own skin than he was.
But he's really the only historical record we have, and
That's all it was.
right, he's a history.
That's helpful.
Yeah. So
It can be helpful as long as we remember that it's
well,
not
that's my
inspired.
point. It's not inspired, and so we can only go by what he says. And you got to remember, he was under the order at that time of recording it from the Romans. He had actually been made an envoy at times, going to the Jews to offer up this peace. And if he didn't work with them, it was crucifixion. So he was trying to save his own skin, but he had to do it the way he had to record things accurately or he would die. That's what he was told to do. So as far as those things concerning the Jewish wars, I will agree with you, Ron. He is not inspired. But
We know that.
right, but he was an eyewitness. Yeah, he was a historian and he was an eyewitness.
And fallible, if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, and he even gives, at one point, he speaks of Jesus actually existing. I'd have to go back and look where it is, but he actually makes mention that there was one who was called Crispus, if I remember correctly, who many believed to be the Messiah, and that the Jewish leaders themselves had killed, but his followers claimed him to be resurrected. The only thing he makes a statement was, he was a man, if you could call him but a man. So he even kind of teetered with it. So, and that's my point. My point was, people come up with things and it gets passed down, and you can't even go to the record you have and prove it. Now we got to bear that out. Notice he will send his angels, messengers, with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. This comes back to that, getting them out of Jerusalem. There would be those, as it said, we translate angelos as angels. It literally means messengers. Someplace we translate it as messengers. People who preached the gospel at that time would have been messengers. And so in sending the message and teaching this message, they would be gathering them out of Jerusalem. That's really what a reference is. It has nothing to do with men that try to make it into the rapture that they're looking for today, because we get into this point here. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches already become tender and puts forth leaves, you shall know that summer is near. It says, learn what you've heard. And notice, so also when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. What generation? The ones he's talking to. You notice when we finished in Matthew 23, basically the same thing. These things will fall on this generation. This generation, this present day generation will not pass away. So this tells us First of all, two things. One, that it's not a future event for us, but a past event. It was future for them. Two, it can't be talking about the end of the world because what are you going to learn from that? When the world ends, what's going to happen then? What's the point of the parable? Notice, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So there's a final statement concerning it, that even when heaven and earth pass away, this will still be remembered. I've reached a conclusion that people will be judged according to what they had as part of their judgment. The people that fell in Jerusalem, that may try to claim they did not understand, God's going to say, here were the prophecies. Here's what was told. Why did you not listen? I think that's the word, one sentence none of us want to hear. Why did you not listen? We're going to stop there and start next week on answering the question, the end of the age. Let's stand and sing.
Let's sing. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arm. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arm. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arm. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arm. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arm. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arm. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arm. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near. Leaning on the everlasting arm. Safe and secure from all alarm. Leaning on the everlasting arm.